Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's fact. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome to episode 152 of the Last Round Podcast. A big weekend of fights to review. Canelo obviously back into the ring, and joining me for, I don't know, the fourth, fifth, sixth time maybe, friend of the show, Andy Clarke. Thanks for joining me, Andy.
No problem. Always enjoy this. Always enjoy it.
Before we delve into the fights, obviously I follow you on social media. You've had a busy times over at the amateurs. How's things been going?
Yeah, good. I've had a really good kind of 6 weeks. I was at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for AJ Usyk, which was, everybody saw it. It was kind of fascinating really to watch how that all unfolded, and to have a full stadium back was amazing, obviously. Then pretty swiftly after that, I was in Vegas for Fury Wilder, working for British Radio rather than TV, which I've been doing a bit of over the last year, which is really good fun. That's how I started. I started in radio for TalkSport, who I was over there covering the fight for. So that was great to be back working with them. And it was just an unbelievable fight. You know, the kind of fight you, as a commentator, you just dream about getting. You always want those big fights, and then you really want them to deliver. And it was everything you could possibly have wanted and more. So that was tremendous. And then fairly shortly after that, I headed over to Belgrade in Serbia for the men's world amateurs, which was really interesting because unique circumstances. It coming a couple of months after an Olympic Games, which never normally happens, of course. So you got loads of new faces, lots of really inexperienced fighters. There was no qualification for it. So in the early rounds, there were some fighters there who weren't really of the standard, who shouldn't really have been there, to be honest. But they got eliminated fairly quickly, and then the standard from maybe the second prelim round, certainly by the time you got to the quarterfinals, was back where it always is. And it was great. It's always really interesting watching fighters come through. And I think we'll get onto it a bit later, but the USA team were very impressive. I was really impressed with them from the start because most of them are very, very young. Most of them had absolutely no senior international experience at all. But they just took to the ring, took to the stage like they really belonged there, and really owned it. And 2 golds and 2 silvers was the terrific haul. And most of them were lads I didn't know. I'd not seen, certainly. I'd heard a bit about some of them, but not much. But they were great. You know, Jamal Harvey was terrific. Robbie Gonzalez, he was in my ring all the time. And the fights he had were extraordinary. And I mean, the final was amazing. He turned it around with a 10-8 in the final round. And that was I've never seen anything like that, to be honest. Roscoe Hill was really, really good. Amari Jones, for Sean Lee, Jamar Talley, they all really performed. It was impressive. They were kind of my standout team, to be honest, because they were so young and so inexperienced. And I'm assuming they'll all stay with the program and go to Paris. And if that's the case, you know, they're going to be a very strong side by then.
Do you think anything will change now that they're actually kind of giving away, prize money?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really interesting development that we've had this year. I've done a lot for AIBA this year, starting with the World Youth back in April, and they introduced it then, and they're trying to make the look of it more like pro boxing. So visually, it's very impressive. There's massive big screens. They've really invested in it. The kind of spec of it production-wise is as good as anything I've ever done. We had David Diamante over for the second day of the finals to give it a little bit more kind of sparkle. MCs for each ring before that. I hesitate to say proper MCs because the MCs they've had before have done nothing wrong, but they were told to give it a bit more, and ring walk music and all that kind of thing. But the prize money is really interesting because I think what he's looking to do with Umar Kremlev is just make AIBA boxing that bit more attractive that fighters won't necessarily maybe turn over. And they've got this ongoing situation with the IOC. The IOC don't seem to me to want to give them any credit for any of the reforms that they've carried out over the last year or so. They just seem to want to knock them at every available opportunity. And I think maybe he's gearing himself up for a situation whereby if they're going to continue to do that, then he's just going to do his own thing. Just continue doing things the way he's doing them and just see what happens. But the prize money is $100,000 is a huge amount of money for anybody. But some of these fighters from, countries where there isn't as much money around, that's life-changing money. That is life-changing money. 50 grand for a silver medal, 25 for a bronze. And at all the competitions I've been to this year, even the juniors, even the European juniors, there was prize money. So that is a serious step. He's got everything sponsored by Gazprom. He's obviously very well connected. And I think he genuinely does really care about the boxers. And they've got Istvan Kovac as general secretary now, Koko Kovac, who is a brilliant amateur, professional world champion. And that's what he's all about, is just trying to make everything as geared basically to making sure they can perform and they've got everything they need as it possibly can be. So it is very interesting times with that kind of code of boxing. And we did have some pros as well, because one thing that's been a bit frustrating the last few years is people popping up every now and again and saying that it's unfair that pros are allowed to box in AIBA boxing, and people always pick out that knockout that Jalilov had against Richard Torres, who, when it happened, people jumped on it and said, oh, look at this, it's unfair. We've got this pro boxer, this huge super heavyweight against this guy. And they were trying to make out that Torres is some kind of like callow, inexperienced, kid off the street. And he's not that. He won a silver medal at the Olympic Games. And what they forget is that Israel Madrimov, for example, went to the same Asian Championships that Jalilov did, but got knocked out in the quarterfinals. So didn't qualify for the World Championships. And the one we've just had, Hasanboy Dusmatov, was there. First time he'd boxed in AIBA boxing since he won a gold medal in the Olympics in Rio. He went out in the first round because readjusting to a 3-round fight is really difficult. And Shakram Gyasov, he was there as well. And he got beaten in his first fight, got his head jabbed off by a Kazakh called Aslanbek Shimburganov. So when they do come back, these fighters, it's not some kind of given that they're going to dominate. Far from it. So yeah, the whole thing just all round is really, really interesting. But the prize money is significant, definitely. It'll be interesting to see if that does have the kind of effect that I'm guessing he's hoping it will.
Somebody that jumped off the page to somebody that doesn't necessarily follow amateur boxing that much, Andy Cruz. Do you think this type of money will keep him as an amateur? Because I'm sure a lot of people want to see him turn pro and see what he can do in the pros.
Yeah, I mean, he's won 3 world titles in a row now and won in Tokyo. Tokyo was, luckily for him, the weights didn't really change too much. So he was 56 kilos originally when I first saw him in 2015, but he had Robeisy Ramirez ahead of him. And it looked at one point like he might get that slot because there were a few things going on with Ramirez, but then he went to the Olympics and won. And then Andy moved straight up to 64, which for the Olympics became 63, which now AIBA have got 13 weight categories for the seniors now, is now 63 and a half. So that's worked out pretty well for him, but he's supersonic. I mean, he's so good, brilliant to watch. Generally speaking, Cuban fighters, more often than not, they don't turn pro because it's such a difficult thing to do, and it comes at a heavy price. I mean, we've seen Ramirez has done it, and he lost his first fight, and he's getting back on track now, and Argilagos fairly recently too, but not that many of them do. So I think he'll probably stay, to be honest with you. I mean, he's mid-20s now, so if he was going to do it, he would do it now. It wouldn't necessarily make a brilliant pro. That's just based on what I've seen on stylistically, he would have to change quite a lot, I think. Not that he wouldn't be capable of doing it necessarily, but he is perfect for that 3-round format because he just finds a way. For Sean Lee, gave him a good fight, actually. Gave him a good fight in the quarterfinals, but yeah, he just finds a way. He just finds a way to win. Because Sean Davis gave him a good fight as well, but in the Olympic final in Tokyo. But he just finds incredible angles and just lands a lot of scoring punches. And I think he digs a little bit harder than people think he does. But I don't necessarily expect to see him turn professional, personally.
Yeah, would be interesting to see. Just because he's very high at the minute, isn't he? After the Olympic performance. Yeah,
he is. And Julio La Cruz was there again. He won another world title. Since he's moved up to heavyweight, he won in Tokyo and he won another one. And he's still the same kind of mesmerising force that he used to be. Not quite as quick anymore. And when he moved up to heavyweight, I did wonder how that'd go for him, because he moved up from light heavy really because I guess the weight was too difficult for him. And he'd slowed down a little bit. He got knocked out by Khalil Coe at the Chemistry Cup in 2018. Then 2019 at the World Championships, got a bronze medal, having won 4 consecutive golds before that. And I just wondered whether they might hit a bit too hard for him because he had slowed down a touch. But then on the flip side of that, the fighters he's fighting aren't quite as quick. So he still managed to do really what he's always done. The Cubans are great. Arlen Lopez wasn't there, which was a shame, but they just got a conveyor belt of new fighters you see who have just been coming second and third in the Cuban national championships because they're behind these terrific number ones, and they just step up. They step up. I mean, it's quite phenomenal, really, the way they manage to just keep producing them year on year on year. And as I say, more often than not, not that many of them make that step and turn professional. And when they do, often it's not like they haven't achieved, because plenty of them have won world titles, but the culture shock for them of moving to America, which is where they generally end up, as opposed to what their life has been like under the national team in Cuba, is just so different. They struggle to adapt to it.
No, it's true. And then a lot of them, they have that Cuban style, so they're kind of like negative when they turn pro as well. And doesn't always transition over very well.
Not always. No, you look at someone like Rigondeaux, who won 2 Olympic gold medals, probably would have won a third if he hadn't been cast out of the system, basically, for trying to defect he tried to defect at the Pan Ams, I think, in 2007, and it didn't quite work. And he came back, and then he was on the outside, so he didn't go to Beijing, and then he did turn pro. And it's not like he hasn't won stuff. I mean, people forget that performance against Nonito Donaire. At the time, Donaire was absolutely flying, wasn't he? And Rigondeaux took him to school. I mean, it was pretty amazing. But he's never really tried to adapt his style for pro boxing. He just does what he does. And he stepped up in weight and done all those kinds of things. So it's not like he hasn't wanted to go and take the big fights. But in terms of the way he goes about it, it's always been the same. And people would complain that he's not that good to watch. But there's no changing the man. He's kind of fascinating, Rigondeaux. There's been some good stuff done on him, and I've always really liked him. But he's a relatively good example. Physically, he managed to not overindulge, which is a problem that some of them do have when they come to the States. He never did that.
Happens to us all, Andy. Happens to us all.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it just? It's a fascinating, subject, Cuban boxing. And as things change gradually over there, which I believe they are and have been for a while, then maybe things will be slightly different. But as it is, that move that you have to make, you have to leave your family behind. There's no guarantee you'll ever see them again. It's very lonely. They will often come in pairs or head for Miami, where there's more of there's a big Cuban scene. Obviously, there's a huge Cuban influence there to try and make it as much like home as they can. But ultimately, it's so different, and the price they pay is heavy. And I don't know if I've ever really come across one who's convinced me that it was worth it, to be honest with you.
Sounds like an episode of Macklin's Take. We should do on Cuban boxing.
We're doing one tomorrow, actually, with Kelvin Travis, who's a very well-known amateur coach ever. He coached Macklin, actually, in the amateurs. So it'd be interesting to hear what he's got to say about the whole scene and just about what we were talking about there. But it would be, but we'd need to get one of these guys, really, just to explain to us, what it's actually like. Mike Perez was another one who always really fascinated me. He ended up in the west of Ireland.
Right, yeah.
And I think he's making a comeback now. He was in the Super Series a little while ago, moved up to Cruiser. I think he's been out of the ring for another 3 years, and I saw something today that he's fighting again, I think in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I actually got a thing from a PR asking if we wanted him for interviews.
Yeah, I don't know what his English is like. I think it's okay. But getting into it with these guys, I think, would probably be quite difficult in terms of the background and what that journey, what that transition was like. I mean, I would love to hear a real in-depth account of what it's like in that academy, in that system, in that national federation. It'd be brilliant. But they're a closed shop. When you see them around at tournaments, it's not that they're unfriendly. They're perfectly friendly, but they don't speak English. I don't speak Spanish. You can try and talk to the coaches, but it never really gets you very far. I remember at a World Series boxing final when Ramirez wasn't there, for example, trying to ask Rolando Acebal why Ramirez wasn't there. And he gave me a look, that made it very, very clear that I was not to ask questions about team selection because they'd allowed me to come to training. So, I shut up at that point and just observed.
Yeah, well, hopefully you can get someone one day. That'd be a good episode, I think, a good in-depth episode to do.
It would. It'd be really good. I think someone like, I don't know who the best candidate for that would be. Someone like Erizlandi Lara would be good. Casamayor, someone like that who did it, a while ago now. Yeah. I think it's Bryn Jonathan Butler, isn't it? Over in the States, did a good doc about it, did a good book about it. Mainly focused around Rigondeaux. I remember really enjoying that. But he was kind of searching for ego. I think it might have been called that actually, and I don't think he ever really got to sit down with the man. Maybe these things will change. Maybe times will change, and I think Jorge Rubio would probably be quite a good one because he came from that system too. And I know it's very difficult for him when he left. I know he left a family behind. He left a wife behind, and it's a real human interest story as well as a kind of fascinating boxing one.
So turning our attention to the weekend, Saturday the 6th of November, MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas on Showtime pay-per-view. Saul Canelo Alvarez, 57-1-2, got the knockout round 11 over Canelo-Plant, who dropped to 21-1. Going in, Andy, what did you expect?
I'm sounding wise after the event here, but I expected what happened. Before the Saunders fight, I expected what happened, which is that he would just be too much for them. They're two really good fighters. But ultimately, Canelo is he's at that level now where I just don't really see who could beat him, even if he's moved up to light heavyweight. And I'm sure we'll get onto that because he's running out of opponents at super middleweight, where he really does look absolutely unstoppable. But to do what he's done over the last year and unify that division in such quick time, taking 4 fights in 11 months, it's a bit of a lesson to everybody, really. But only a special fighter can do that because he's so dedicated and he's so good. He's just so good. There's not really much else you can say about him. And I thought Plant did pretty well. I didn't score it round by round, so I have to break my usual rule of not commenting on fights that I haven't scored round by round. But Plant won the first round, I think. Like Billy Joe won the first round, and I think there was maybe a couple towards the end, 8, 9, 10. Maybe you could have gone his way, but I thought the scorecards 8-2, 7-3, 6-4. I thought they looked about right to me. There were some people going for 5-5, but I think when you've got a fight where there's a superstar, and we had this with Mayweather, didn't we? Not that long ago, and an opponent who is heavily unfancied, it's very tempting or quite easy to subconsciously maybe give them more rounds than you should because maybe they're doing a bit better than you thought they would. And people I thought did that in the Saunders fight. I think I had Canelo winning almost every round. It wasn't that Saunders wasn't competitive because he was, and Plant was at times. But ultimately, although you can win the odd battle against Canelo, you just never get the feeling that they're going to win the war because he just looks comfortable, doesn't he? He never really looks like he's hurt. And you just feel this irresistible force at some point is just going to run them over. And that's what happened. But it was a good fight. I enjoyed the build-up, a bit of spice to the build-up. And the whole event looked good. There was another card on the Friday night, wasn't it? Michaela Mayer. That was a good fight against Maeve Hamadouche. And Vegas looked like it was buzzing. It was in good shape when I went a few weeks ago. Maybe not quite how it normally is, but it was good. I very much enjoyed being around that. It kind of built during the week. There weren't any British fans over there, so that took something away from it a little bit. But it looked like it was firing on all cylinders again. The whole city really for that weekend. And the MGM Grands, the T-Mobile was great, but all the press stuff was in the MGM Grand for Fury Wilder, and that's just that's the place, isn't it? I think really.
What do you think of the evolution so far of what we've seen from Canelo over the 60 fights that he's had?
Well, I mean, he turned pro so young, didn't he, at 15? So he's had that kind of fairly typical Mexican schooling in that sense. And people talk about him taking that fight against Mayweather and him being so young and Mayweather, getting him at the right time and all of that. I don't really agree with that, because Mayweather was 36. I think that was still a very good performance by Mayweather. It wasn't a close fight. And I'm not convinced that if he'd boxed Mayweather at any other point that he would have beaten him. But obviously, weight-wise, they quite quickly disappeared in opposite directions. And that was at a catch weight anyway, wasn't it? I think it was 152. I think his career's been plotted very, very well. I mean, you look at the fights he's taken. He does have the failed drug test. That's a fact. That happened. And for some people, that will always be a problem. And it is a problem. We shouldn't get away from it. It is a problem. And the punishment for that was negligible. He went off and had a knee operation. And it's a good example of how I think if there's no real deterrent for offending, then there's no reason for people not to try it. There was an explanation for it, but that's there, and it's a blot on the copybook. But he's just evolved into the complete fighter. When you watch him, his movements are fractional but incredibly effective. He hits hard. He's very difficult to hit, and he just brings that relentless front foot pressure. It's not like he throws bundles and bundles of punches, but he's just on you all of the time. And I think it would be an utterly exhausting experience to fight him. And watching Cruz, who we were talking about earlier, brought to mind the same kind of thing, because at all points you're under enormous pressure. I kind of, an example from another sport kind of popped into my head when I was watching Cruz actually a week ago or whatever it was. Because he was in my ring, so I saw all his fights. I remember talking or hearing an interview with Wayne Rooney after Manchester United played Barcelona in the Champions League final in 2011, when Barcelona, I reckon, were probably at their peak there. This will be a bit lost on people who don't follow football, but Barcelona were just completely all-conquering at that point. They were the Canelo, Mayweather, whatever you want to call it, of football at the time. And they beat United 3-1. And it was kind of inevitable that they would win that game, even though United were a very strong team. And Rooney just said afterwards, he said, the thing about playing them is that it's just knackering. It's just absolutely, completely knackering, because when you've got the ball, you've got to work incredibly hard to keep it. When they've got it, you've got to work incredibly hard to get it back. And just watching Cruz and fighters like that, Canelo, it just popped into my head, because I just thought, yeah, like when he's attacking you, you've got a problem. But when you're trying to attack him, you've just got as big a problem. Because if you leave any gaps, then you're going to pay for it. So every single second you're in there, you're just occupied constantly. And mentally, I think you just see people's batteries run down. In 3 rounds against Cruz, you would see it. And against Canelo, you see it. All of a sudden, the tank is basically empty. And the fight's over. Usyk's the same. The same. Like Bellew said exactly that about fighting Usyk, is that he was doing well. The cards are pretty level. He was doing well. He was up on one, I think. But he said he just got to the start of the 7th or the 8th or whatever it was, and he just realised, Christ, I'm done, because this guy is just on you, in your face all of the time, and that's what Canelo brings. And only special fighters can do that, because they're within punching range, but you can't hit them. He can slip and avoid punches moving forward, and very few people can do that.
What did you think of the video that got released, I think, this week of, Caleb kind of talking to Canelo in round 9? A lot of people have kind of taken it in a negative light, that Caleb was kind of accepting that he was losing, and he was looking for, Canelo to accept, like, hey, Caleb, you are a good fighter, before he kind of like checked out, and he was, he could kind of see the writing was on the wall and that he was going to lose.
Yeah, it was an interesting watch, that video, but I don't think that's what he was doing. I think at that point he was just trying anything he could, just to try and disrupt him, just do anything, literally, including talking to him, to think of, is there a way that I can get a moment's respite from this guy? The fighters don't think like that. He's not in there in the middle of the heat of battle thinking, okay, well, hopefully if I can get him to admit that I'm a good fighter, and hopefully somebody will catch it on video at ringside. I mean, that's just like, they don't do that. Fighters don't do that. I remember during the week for Fury Wilder, when Wilder just chose not to really engage. He put his headphones on during the press conference, and he didn't really want to he just looked like he didn't really want to be there. And then on the night, he wouldn't allow cameras into the dressing room and all this kind of thing. And people were talking about how, that's a sign that, he doesn't really believe in himself and all the rest of it. And I just thought, come on, like, that isn't it. He just doesn't want to engage with Fury. He just doesn't want to drain himself of that mental energy that it inevitably will be drained from you if you decide to have some kind of trash talking competition with Tyson Fury. It's not worth it. So it's a different kind of thing. But yeah, Canelo-Plant at that point was just, I think he was just trying anything he could just to try and distract this guy and see if he could get him to drop his guard for a second, quite literally, and get something done. He was deep in the fight and he was in trouble, and he probably knew it. But that for me is not running up the white flag. That's just a fighter kind of maybe on their last legs a little bit, just trying to do anything they possibly can.
Do you think it was a step too far for Canelo-Plant in the terms of, before this fight, he's never really fought anybody near, Canelo's kind of level. He fought like Mike Lee, Jose Uzcategui won the IBF. And I've heard a few people say that, Canelo-Plant kind of did the Anthony Yarde type route of, he picked up like the IBF against Jose Uzcategui, kind of held it, and then, just waited to fight Canelo or somebody else to pretty much just sell it. Kind of where Anthony Yarde fought a whole host of nobodies, positioned himself very well with the WBO, got that payoff against Kovalev, and then that was kind of all they were really looking for.
I mean, I can understand that argument. There's evidence to support that, but at the same time, that's what happens with fighters' careers quite often, isn't it? Sometimes they just don't really have that kind of gut check, or they don't really have those fights that maybe they really need. But then you could argue, is anyone really going to prepare you for him? Probably not. Anthony Yarde is the perfect example to pick out really on that kind of front, because he bypassed the British scene. They decided that he was past the British scene. He was very highly ranked with the WBO, and then at that point, what do? You look at someone like Dillian Whyte. He continually rolled the dice, and then eventually it went wrong against Alexander Povetkin. He rectified that. And then now he's decided, I don't know what happened with the Otto Wallin situation. I always prefer to take people at their word that there was an injury. But he's right now to wait for Tyson Fury, I think, because he's waited long enough. And why would you jeopardize it? It's high risk, literally no reward to take a fight in the meantime. And for Canelo-Plant, I mean, I think he did the right thing. And you've got to back yourself. And these fighters are undefeated. They believe in themselves. Their teams believe in them. There's no way he was going into that fight not thinking he could win. I genuinely believe that. Whether you think they're deluded or not, they always think they're going to win. I've never really seen a fighter during fight week in a fight like that or any similar kind of magnitude and look in their eyes or get a kind of sense that they really don't think they're going to win. They always think they're going to win. They have to walk this fine line between confidence and self-delusion. That's just part of the job. You speak to any fighter and they'll tell you that. They might know that nobody else thinks they're going to win. They might even get a sense that possibly members of their own team don't even think they're going to win. But for them, of course they're going to win. You look at Wilder against Fury. Absolutely, he thought he was going to win. You could tell that as soon as he walked to the ring. So it is very possible in the way that boxing is, just the way that boxing is, that you can get yourself to an elevated platform without seemingly having done too much. But then it'll be interesting to see what he does now, because he did show himself to be a very capable fighter. It'll be interesting to see what Canelo does now, because he's got all of the belts. What's he going to do? Is he going to step up to light heavyweight? Personally, I'm never in favour of people just stepping up in weight again and again and again until finally they're just in with someone too big. And I was always pleased that Mayweather didn't do that, because why should he do it? People are always calling for him. Oh, you should fight Golovkin, people were saying at one point. I mean, that's ridiculous, because he was at his heaviest, like 150, wasn't he? I don't think he ever really weighed any more than that. Maybe not even that. So I wouldn't want to see him lose just because he stepped up too far. But I don't think light heavyweight is too far. I think he'd be okay at that weight. And you look at the fighters there, I think he'd beat Bivol. I've seen Bivol a few times. Good fighter. I think he'd beat Bivol. I think he may well beat Beterbiev. Beterbiev's 36, 37 now. And he would surely want that fight. I know he's got Marcus Brown coming up in December, but should he win that, then he would surely want that fight, Beterbiev, because he's undefeated. but he hasn't really had a big money fight. I mean, the fight he had against Gvozdyk was tremendous, but it was a great example of a brilliant fight that basically just attracted no attention at all, did it? It was a unification between, Ukrainian and a Russian, two former very good amateurs, but it was just a difficult sell. I don't think it got any TV back here, which was amazing, really. So I think, if you were looking after Beterbiev, you would want that. And Canelo's previously said after Kovalev, hasn't he, that he's not really interested in light heavyweight, but who else is he going to fight? That's the question, isn't it? I mean, people talk about Benavidez because he's the one kind of left at a super middleweight maybe, but he's 31 now, is he, Canelo? He's young still. He's had a lot of fights. What else is he going to do? He's not going to retire. So for me, really, that's the only thing he can do, because he's not going to go back down, is he? You look at the shape of him, there's no way he can go back down to middleweight. That's not a possibility. And I don't really see anybody at the moment coming up through the weights, maybe from middleweight to super middleweight, who anytime soon is going to challenge him. And having cleaned that division out in a year, he's really left himself nowhere else to go.
Do you think we could see the Benavidez fight in Cinco de Mayo? And then I know Eddie's recently talked about, him coming over in either, 2022, maybe 2023 over to the UK. And if he does that, apart from maybe John Ryder, do you see anyone else, another Brit that could, really attract Canelo?
No, not really. Not really. The Benavidez fight, I'd say that could well happen, couldn't it? And it'd be great to see him over here. It'd be brilliant. He would be a big draw, big sell, because he's the best fighter in the world, I would say. And he's up there as being he is the biggest draw, isn't he? I would say he is the biggest draw. In the UK, he wouldn't be. Obviously, Joshua and Fury are the biggest draws over here. But in terms of who he would fight if he brought him over here, it probably would be John. John's at light heavyweight now as well, though. So that's where that would have to be. I would love to see John Ryder get a really big fight, because he was unlucky against Callum Smith. I personally didn't think it was the kind of outright robbery that most people seem to think. I thought it was close, but he definitely could have got it, and maybe he should have, but he hasn't had that real big fight yet, John Ryder, to really make some money. So I would like to see him get that. But as for any other candidates for him, really, I'm not sure there are any.
Eubank?
Well, I mean, Eubank possibly. Eubank's a middleweight, really. He stepped up and boxed at super middleweight in the Super Series, but he's back down at middleweight now, and he looks good at middleweight. He looks well at middleweight. He would do it, I think, probably. People will point to Golovkin and say, well, he didn't take that fight, and he could have done. I think Eubank would probably take that fight, because that's the kind of bloke that he is. But I wouldn't really see that being particularly competitive, to be honest with you. I think Eubank I really enjoy watching him. I love his work ethic, the way he's gone about things his whole career, because he was put through the mill by his old man deliberately when he was young. And there's no doubt that this is for him, that he's completely committed to it. And he's got that mentality that you need. But I think he might just fall short at that highest level, like he did against Groves, for example. But Canelo's there aren't that many options out there for him, and that is a bit of a shame. I mean, Maris Breedis piped up this week, didn't he, and said, come on, big man, step up to cruiserweight. But he's not going to do that. I mean, that would be an example of somebody just going way too high for no particular reason.
Do you think, even though all the plaudits that Canelo gets, do you still think he's actually underrated?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so anymore. I think he really is coming into his absolute best now. And what he needs is that real big fight. He needs that dance partner, doesn't he, who he can maybe have a couple of fights with. And maybe someone like Beterbiev is that guy. I mean, it's not like he's got loads of miles on the clock or anything like that, because he really, really doesn't in the 16, 17 pro fights that he's had. But if we were going to remember Canelo as he will be remembered as an all-time great, I think, but you want him to be in those kind of epic fights. And at the moment, I struggle to see who there is out there who's going to give him that, apart from the name I just keep coming back to, which is Beterbiev. He does need that. All you can do ever is beat the opponents who are out there for you to box. But we always just love to see someone, generally speaking, fighters, really good fighters, become more beloved when they lose. If Mayweather had lost and then had to come back and avenge the defeat, I think people would give him more credit than they do now. If he'd stepped up again in weight, for example, and he had boxed Golovkin and he'd lost, and then he'd come back and he'd won, or something like that. I think about Eubank in the UK, Eubank Senior, and people just kind of took to him a lot more after he'd lost. You know, when he lost to Kawasaki, and you know the fights he had subsequent to that, it's against Carl Thompson, and it's a strange one, but generally speaking, people love a comeback, don't they? And were Canelo to lose to somebody, if somebody could beat him, and then a second fight, and then maybe a third, that would almost be the ideal thing for us, but not for him, obviously.
How much do you of the evolution of Canelo from, you know, what he was as when he first started to, you know, working on all the things that he wasn't great at, like working on his defense over the years? How much emphasis do you put on Eddie Reynoso?
Well, I think you have to put a lot of it on him because they've been with him all the way through. And so when that's the case, the trainer has to take a lot of credit because they obviously saw something when he was 15, but he's 15, you know, he's literally a child in technical terms, isn't he? So they've taught him, and they really have. So you can't take anything away from them. And he has improved to the point now where, as I said previously, he just is the complete fighter because there are just no real chinks in that armour. There just don't seem to be any chinks in that armour at all. And I don't see him ever leaving them, which is good, you know, because fighters do tend to leave their trainers. It was interesting to see that one of the trainers Joshua visited when he went to the United States was them. You know, why wouldn't you? But I wouldn't necessarily see that working. I mean, what are they going to teach him how to fight like Canelo in a matter of months? That's not going to happen. That's impossible. But the training team there, yeah, I think they have to take a large share of the credit because there's obviously a lot of trust there, and always has been, and there always will be.
It's funny how, you know, I was chatting to somebody at work and they were just saying, like, why is he so good? And I think if you were going to, you know, write down characteristics you need, you know, for the perfect fighter, he kind of has it. He's like super professional. You never see him like overweight. He's always in the gym. As soon as he, you know, finishes a fight, he's back in there. You know, a lot of people, when they go to the gym, they work on stuff that they're actually already good at. Whereas you can see with Canelo, like his head movement, especially when he fought Jacobs, you know, it was just amazing. You can see all those different things that he's worked on. He doesn't just stick to, you know, what he's good at. So, yeah, he's just a super professional, isn't he?
Yeah, in every possible way. And what I love about watching him is, as I said before, he just applies that relentless pressure, which in the end just breaks his opponents because every mistake they make, he makes them pay for it. And the economy of movement is very impressive because he slips shots by fractions. He makes you miss by fractions. That little pullback, he makes you fall short by fractions. He'll offer you the head and then all of a sudden he looks like he's in range, but he isn't in range. His front foot is right on top of you. Surely he's in range, and then he's not because he's just hinging at the waist and then just pulling back. And as I say, he manages to slip shots moving forward, and not many people can do that. And if you can do that, then it means that when you make them miss, you make them pay. And that's what this is. That's what this is about. That's what pro boxing is. And he's in there to hurt people. You know, he's not in there to mess around and put on some kind of boxing clinic, although he is capable of doing that and does do that. When you see those punches land, I mean, it's savagery. It really is. And you literally see him break people. That's what he did to Saunders. That's what he did to Plant. And it's going to take somebody very, very special to beat him, or who can hit him hard enough. And maybe Beterbiev can, that he can't be quite so bold, that he might have to take a backward step. I struggle to see it.
One of the things I love about him is he's like 30, 31 years old. He's already had 60 fights. And in a recent interview, he said that he's got another 5-6 years left in him. Where you get boxers like Ryan Garcia who've really done nothing and won nothing, and they're already talking about retiring at 30 years old.
Yeah, well, this is his life, isn't it? And it always has been. And he's just completely dedicated to it. It's, as people always say, boxing is not a 9 to 5. It's a religion. It's a 24/7. There are no days off, because even on your day off, you still have to be doing the right things. You might not be training, but you've got to make sure you're sleeping right and you're eating right, and I don't know, he probably watches tape and all that kind of stuff. He's completely obsessed with it. And you have to be, I think you have to be. He is a great lesson to all fighters out there. And when you look at people who are at the top of their game in any of the divisions, they are all the same like that, because you don't see Tyson Fury. Okay, he puts out his videos of getting up to the odd bit of nonsense, but at the minute he's helping his brother out. Andy Lee put out a funny video today of them doing this press-up exercise to the song Jolene, and Tyson's there. He's around it all the time. He just wants to be training all the time. Joshua's the same. Like, you never see Joshua in anything other than a boxing setting. You don't see him at film premieres. You see him on the odd chat show, but not that much. He's never in the papers. Like, nobody knows anything about his private life because it's private. And they're all the same like that. Mayweather was legendary for it, wasn't he? It was always funny watching those all accesses where he would make out like he's eating McDonald's and all the rest of it. And he's not. He's not doing that. He's not doing that. He's calling everybody to the gym at 2:00 in the morning because that's when he wants to train. They're just on it all the time because they know that if you want some longevity in this sport more than any other, that's how you have to be. And if you've got that kind of style that Canelo has got, like I said, where of course he's explosive, but there is an economy of effort there, you can have that. He will probably need to adapt a little bit as he gets older, and that decision to retire will be hard because it's always hard. But there are certain fighters who are more given to a longer career because of the way they go about things than others, and he's just a perfect example of it, really. But you touched on Ryan Garcia there, and one great frustration of mine are the lightweights, because when Teofimo Lopez beat Lomachenko, it did really look like we were kind of ushering in this new era, and people were talking about the 4 new kings, and they're talking about, Teofimo, they're talking about Ryan Garcia, they're talking about Devin Haney, talking about Gervonta Davis, other fighters as well who can maybe enter the mix, and just nothing's happened. Nothing's happened. And I just find that really disappointing. Just really disappointing. It's out there for them and nothing's going on. Nothing whatsoever. And I'm not one for complaining too much about fights we don't get, because I think often we do complain a bit too much about fights we don't get and don't celebrate the ones we do get, because we do get some really good ones. But they should be fighting each other, those guys. They should be fighting each other, and it doesn't really look like it's going to happen.
No, it's true. You'd think that they'd want to strike whilst the iron's hot. It's probably the biggest payday for them all as well, to just have a round robin and all fight each other. And you'd think that, just looking at what's happened before, when other people haven't fought and they missed out, and then people retire and they always say, I wish I'd fought, that guy. You should really learn from fighters before them. But
no one ever does that in boxing, though, do they? You could kind of argue in life generally, but in boxing particularly, we're not great at learning from the mistakes of the past. The same mistakes get repeated again and again and again, and it's, I think that goes on in all sorts of areas. But for me, that's just been. I know we've had COVID, of course, but I just do find it very disappointing that none of those fights have happened, and they don't even really look like they're going to. I mean, Teofimo's fighting at least against Kambosos finally. And I met him in Vegas. He sat down with us and did about 20 minutes, him and Antonio Tarver at the weigh-in, and a great couple of guys, really interesting to listen to. And he does seem to have a really kind of old head on young shoulders. And Lomachenko, I didn't even throw into that mix. I mean, he comes back in December, and he'll want to get back on that train, because he's not finished. Like he's not going to. He wants back in. He'll want to fight Lopez again at some point. He'll want to fight any of them. But I just wish that could happen. That somebody would just make that first step. Shakur Stevenson as well. He's a 2-weight world champion now. You'd imagine he's probably going to come up again at some point. So You could throw him into that mix at some stage too. It's out there for someone to go and take the fights that people want to see. And I do think that ultimately, if a fighter really wants it and makes it clear to their team that this has got to happen, or they've got to at least try and make it happen, then that gives it a much better chance of happening.
We had Kevin Ioli on straight after Shakur's fight, and he's really high on Shakur Stevenson, and I can't remember exactly, but I think he was saying he believes he can win world titles all the way up to 147.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, he's in his early 20s still, isn't he? And he's got an unbelievable pedigree. I saw him in the amateurs quite a bit. In WSB, boxed a little bit. Great final in Rio against Ramirez. And he's done exactly what you would expect him to do so far. And that was a very good performance against Jamel Herring, because make no mistake, like, he's a really good fighter. A great example of what we were just talking about in terms of dedication and all the rest of it. But him stepping up from super feather to lightweight, through lightweight to super lightweight to welterweight, I could see that happening. Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. And hopefully he'll fight Oscar Valdez. I mean, that's the fight, isn't it? That would be a brilliant fight. And you look at it and you think, surely that's going to happen, because they're both with Top Rank. You know, surely that's going to happen. But you just never really know, do you? You just never really know. I mean, he seems to definitely want it. You'd imagine that Valdez would too, because he's that kind of guy as well. But Shakur, yeah, he has delivered. He has delivered, and maybe he could be that guy who just says, "Listen, this is what I want to do, and I will not tolerate it not happening." Of course, there's the other side to the equation, and if they don't want it, then what can you do about that? And I don't know what's been going on behind the scenes with any of these people. But what I do know is that the fights that we should have been seeing, or should be at least be starting to see, we're not seeing.
Last one on Canelo before we move on. Do you think he stays with Eddie, or do you think he goes back, has another fight with PBC?
That is a good question. I think the relationship with Eddie is real. I think they are quite tight, because they've got Matchroom Mexico kind of going on, haven't they? And like Mauricio Lara, who came over, he was one of their guys. Valenzuela, I think, who beat Robbie Davis, I think he's another one of their guys. So there's a real relationship there, and I think Eddie's delivered for him every time they've worked together. But I think ultimately he'll just go wherever he wants, and I don't think he would. If you're him, like, why would you sign some kind of exclusive deal? There's no need, is there? And I don't think, if you're a promoter, you would take it particularly personally if he went off somewhere else for a fight, if you thought you might get the next one. I don't think you can really expect to. I mean, they signed that life, like, rest of the career deal with Anthony before the Usyk fight. I don't think you could ever expect to get Canelo to commit to something like that. I just don't see it. But yeah, I think there's every chance that he'll work with Matchroom again. And if they could bring him to the UK, that'd be tremendous. It would be really interesting to see what kind of, whether they would go for a stadium. I'm guessing they would, and whether he would fill it, because that's a big ask for an overseas fighter. They would want him with a Brit, but it wouldn't be someone who was a particularly big name. So he would be the one who would be filling that stadium. But the world is his oyster, isn't it? Really, he can do whatever he chooses.
No, you'd think now with him, coming kind of towards the end of his career, he'll fight in England. I'm sure he'll go back to Mexico and try to fill one of the huge stadiums there, like Chavez did. Just try and tick off, some bucket list type things before he retires. We're never really going to see another fighter like him, probably in my lifetime. How unusual is it to have somebody of his pedigree with 60 fights? A lot of people turn pro now after an extensive amateur career, like Lomachenko, and they'll have around 20 fights and they're done.
Yeah, I do think that's going to be more and more the way, or at least it could be. Maybe not with Mexicans, because they do generally tend to turn pro young, and they don't really go to the Olympics. I mean, Valdez went to a couple, and Francisco Vargas stayed amateur quite a long time, but it's unusual. I saw a good Mexican actually at the World Championships, a southpaw, Miguel Vega Barreras. I wouldn't be surprised if he turned pro quite soon. Good fighter. Didn't get through to the medal stages, but I liked him. But they, generally speaking, don't send big teams to amateur tournaments because they do still look to turn pro young. But the trend has been in recent years, hasn't it? I mean, you look at all the Uzbeks who've turned pro, who've been making strides, Akhmadaliev, Madrimov, who I mentioned a little bit earlier on. Okay, it went wrong for Melakuziev recently. Jalalov is going to look to move quick. You know, you're looking at fighting for world titles, and Akhmadaliev's a unified world champion in his 8th fight, I think it was. You know, you can move really, really quick. And it doesn't make for a long pro career because they start young and the training camps are hard and loads of 3-round fights. You know, it's people think, oh, it's only 3 rounds, but some of those 3-round fights can be pretty brutal at times. So that's more the way that things are going, but maybe not with Mexicans. But he could go on a bit of a world tour, couldn't he? And boxing, I do think, is becoming more global now because broadcasting's changing. With streaming, there is more emphasis on a global audience rather than kind of nailing down your domestic rights. And you definitely think he's going to fight in Mexico at least a few times between now and the end of his career. And who knows where else he might fancy it. You know, he was in Saudi Arabia. Saw him at the rematch between AJ and Ruiz. He was down ringside for that. I think he's probably quite interested to have a look around, see what that was all about. There's all sorts of things that could happen over the next few years because boxing just isn't it's in a kind of state of flux with the whole TV streaming thing, but there are lots of possibilities.
How big has DAZN been in the UK since it came over?
It's kind of difficult to know because a big problem for them was always going to be, and they won't in any way have underestimated this, they've missed the Sky machine, which basically publicises everything that they did, because that's a huge voice in sport over here. And with boxing just not being on terrestrial TV really anymore, it's on Channel 5. They've been committed to it, to be fair to them, for a while now. They do probably about 8 shows a year, maybe a bit more than that. And they're good level fights, but they don't really have big fights. So Sky's got the most living room penetration. Sky's almost like they're like the terrestrial broadcaster, if you like, in terms of the reach that they've got compared to everybody else. So that's the problem that the DAZN have had is can you grow it much bigger than a hardcore boxing audience? And it's difficult. It's difficult to get that kind of penetration, but they're obviously committed to it. They've signed for a long time. There's rumours over here that they're going to be, and these have been around for a while, that they're going to buy BT Sport. I don't really know what that means in terms of, obviously you would get their rights, but would you then get their linear platform? Would you kind of like move into their offices? Like I don't really know what it means. But it would mean that they would get Premier League football and they would have more of an all-round sports package. And that's the advantage that Sky have got, because I don't think anyone buys Sky just for boxing. There might be the odd person who does, but I wouldn't have thought so. It's one of a number of other things they've got alongside football, which is obviously the thing. If they can get that deal done, then that would make them a lot bigger in the UK. But then you don't really know, would they then concentrate much more on football, and would boxing kind of slip down their list? I mean, I don't know any of the answers to these things, but what you do know about a company like DAZN is they've got a plan. They've always had a plan. They're completely committed to it, because we've had a global pandemic, but there wasn't really any sign. There was the odd rumour during then that they were looking for someone to buy them out, but I don't think there was any. I'm not sure if there was ever any real substance to that. So I think they're here to stay, and the more people doing it, the better. Like, everybody works on that. As a friend of mine, basically. So, you know, you look at it, you just think you want it to do well. You want whoever you're working for to be doing best, but you should want everybody to do well, because, you know, rising tide lifts all ships and all of that. But I think it is quite hard work for them at the minute, probably to attract the number of subscribers that they, whatever that number is, that they need. But they knew that. It's not like they didn't know that. I've got no idea what their numbers are. But again, it's a global platform, isn't it?
Right. No, I think they have the same problem in the US that they have in the UK. Like in the UK, you need a slice of the Premier League football. You just need it. Same as in the US, they need to get hold of, baseball, American football, hockey, basketball.
Yeah, as I understand it, those deals are probably maybe even harder than the Premier League, because the Premier League comes up once every 3 years. They've rolled it over this time because of COVID. So if they don't do this deal with BT, then the first point at which they could bid and get something football-wise would be 2025. Now, that's quite a long time. That's quite a long time. And you can't just be a subscription boxing channel if you're DAZN. I know in other territories they've got big rights, like they've got Serie A in Italy, for example, and I think got quite a lot of stuff in Canada. But we know as hardcore boxing fans that there aren't that many of us. Big fights will draw people in. And if people know, if Joshua goes to DAZN, which personally I think he probably will, and that rematch is on DAZN, then they'll get everything behind that they possibly can to make sure that everybody knows that Joshua is fighting and this is how you watch it. A lot of people will buy it. It's like a the one-off charge for that. If they're not even intending to keep it, it's just like a cheap pay-per-view, isn't it? But then, inevitably they've been talking about doing pay-per-views themselves, which has caused kind of uproar amongst a lot of boxing fans. And I understand why, but that was always going to happen. And personally, I don't really have a big problem with that, so long as it does stay for just the big fights. But it's just a kind of fascinating landscape all round, really. I've never really known a period like it. Because when I it's about 10 years ago that I committed to just trying to do boxing solely. I was doing a lot of football before that. You learn the job and you go and cover what you're told to cover, and it was always football, really. At that point, there was Sky and Box Nation had just started up because Frank Warren left Sky. That relationship came to an end, and he started up his own channel in typical kind of Frank fashion. Box Nation was great. I've still got it now, and there was a time there where they were picking up loads of US fights, and it was tremendous. It was absolutely brilliant. But at the minute, in terms of the amount of subscribers they can pull in, DAZN is it's a much bigger budget Box Nation, and there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, to get the amount of subscribers that they need, whatever number that is, you'd imagine they've got to get football over here. And I think the NFL deals are like 10-year deals, aren't they, or something mad? That's going to be really hard to break into. What their experiences in America, I think, have been. It's different there, isn't it? Because here they'd have 3 years in America, then they'd come here and they've got Eddie, and he's got the biggest stable and he's got the best fighters, and nobody would argue with that. In America, they had to kind of start from scratch, and everybody ganged up on them, didn't they? That's what happened, and it was always going to happen. And I remember thinking in the very early days of it, because they were quite gung-ho with the amount of money they had. That's the route they chose to go, to kind of make a massive splash and try and disrupt. And again, I totally understand why you would do that, but they targeted some real big names early on. Talking about the Charlos and Broner and Gervonta Davis and people like that, and they didn't get them. And I remember thinking early on, I'm not some kind of business guy, but I remember thinking early on that they needed to. That was when they really needed to. The early days were really, really important there. Whereas here it's different because they've already got the fighters. They just need to make people aware of where they are now. But yeah, the American thing has been, I think it's been hard work. I think it's been hard work, but they've still got some good fights on the roster coming up in the next few months.
The only problem I think I have with DAZN really is you can't watch it all day. Like, there's not enough programs on there. There's not enough, side programs that you just really turn it on for the fight, and then when the fight's done, you kind of turn it off. It's not it's not like Netflix where there's plenty of things to choose from. You can watch like different programs all day, documentaries. It has a small, selection of old fights. It has a few, like pre-fight previews, but not a lot. It's you really just paying really just for the fights, and that's about it. Yeah, that's fair. And over here, the subscription originally was $1.99, which was incredible. Obviously, that was always going to go up, and now it's $7.99. I haven't got a problem with that. I've got it, and
But again, if you look at it, I think Sky is. I've got Sky and BT. I've got everything basically because you kind of have to, don't you? If you don't have to, but I was always, we're a boxing salesman's dream army because we're going to buy it all. But I think Sky Sports cost me about £30 a month. As for how much of that would be, if you try to divide it up, like how much am I paying for the boxing? It's not $7.99, I wouldn't say. Probably not. So that charge is, people will say, oh, it's a lot less than Sky, but that sports package is what it's still about, isn't it? And that's it's the ease with which you can watch stuff. Like you say on Netflix, you can flick it on and just find something. I'll find myself just idling around in the afternoon. I'll flick on the TV. I'll go down to Sky Sports, and generally speaking, there's something on there I'll watch. It could be anything. Like I've got quite into NFL the last couple of years, so there might become some kind of like NFL years or whatever. And I think, oh yeah, what's that for a bit? It's just kind of that's what it is, isn't it? Whereas, as you say, with DAZN, it's much more kind of targeted and much more specific.
I mean, it's always makes me laugh because obviously I'm a Brit living in California. When you hear, the guys in the UK kind of complain about the packages and the price, I'm like, it's $80 for a pay-per-view out here. $80 for a pay-per-view. I used to pay for the equivalent of Sky Sports. I used to have a package called Dish TV. And purposely, you have to get all these different packages to really get what you want. You have to get this package and this package. And, the good stuff's always in the more expensive package. And it used to be about $150 a month just to kind of really watch like sports. So,
the pay-per-view cost in America is wild, isn't it? I mean, I remember, again, like during Fight Week Fury Wilder, you have like the grand arrivals and the press conference and all the rest of it, and obviously like the PBC, everybody's pumping that up, and at the grand arrivals, Ray Flores and Christina Ponce were kind of hosting it, and Ray Flores, the amount of times he said pay-per-view and kind of was talking it up it was impressive. That's his job. I'm not knocking the guy. He's really very good at it actually. But you have to do that. You have to do that. And it is a lot of money for pay-per-views in America. It is a lot of money. I mean, I do think that probably coverage of sports like boxing, which is week in, week out, a niche sport, I do think that generally it might be the case that they do go more niche. There are platforms emerging all the time. I mean, there's Fight Zone here. Dennis Hobson's started doing Fight Zone here. Good fights. Like it's $5 a month. It's good. It's good. Production's good. The people that got involved in it are good. And yeah, I'm totally happy to give a $5 for that. But I think as when you're following a niche sport, it is frustrating because it will end up being fragmented and you will have to go to lots of different places to get it. So here, for example, if you want to watch the Sky shows, you've got to have Sky. If you want to watch Frank Warren shows, you've got to have BT Sport. If you want to watch Eddie's shows, you've got to have DAZN. Channel 5's free. IFL TV, you've got MTK, that's free as well, obviously. Then there's, Pro Bellum have popped up over the last couple of months. I don't know what they're going to do in terms of their platform, but there will be one. I mean, there'll have to be.
Yeah.
And again, that's a kind of global thing. So, I think the days of all the big fights being in one place and on one network are over, aren't they? I mean, it's not that long ago that pretty much all the big fights here were on Sky because they go and do a load of American stuff. But, I watch old fights now where Darky and Glenn McCrory are ringside for a big fight in New York or Vegas and there's no Brit involved. That would just never happen now. You just would never send to, although BT did at the weekend, to be fair to them, to Canelo-Plant, but they had to put it on pay-per-view back home in England. And I just don't know how many people would have bought that because there's no Brit involved. And yes, Canelo's a kind of megastar, but he's a kind of a megastar for us, isn't he? Really?
That was on BT.
Yeah, it was on BT Sport Box Office, so it was a pay-per-view. And there are certain fights that American promoters want on pay-per-view. I think Terence Crawford, Canelo-Brook might have been one where ESPN wanted it on pay-per-view. And for that reason, I think Sky passed on it because they just said, I don't think we can really do this because they'd already done one 2 or 3 weeks beforehand or something like that. So you get demands from the broadcaster who's kind of selling it to you of how they want you to do it, and it all gets quite complicated. But yeah, I don't know how many buys BT would have needed to do to kind of break even on that and then start to make money. But and no one ever releases their, well, some people do, but yeah, it just struck me the other day. I was watching some old kind of classic fights on Sky, and I just thought, wow, like Darky really had it great. You know, it's that period where in the 90s with all that heavyweight mayhem, they were over there all the time. And for other stuff too. And it's just not, like, for example, with the Top Rank deal that Sky have signed, Sky are just taking the world feed. So they take the Top Rank coverage, and it's a really well produced thing. So you can do that. You know, I don't think you could do it with everybody, because you'd have 20 minutes where you would just have a camera on an empty ring. And so you've got to do your own thing because you've got to fill in the gaps. But with them, you can just, they do it really well. So you can just take it. And their coverage is good. But, you know, for me, for example, that's not great, because I'd like to commentate on those fights. You know, it's those kinds of things. You know, budgets aren't what they used to be, I guess, and approaches are kind of different to how they used to be. It is an ever changing landscape, and I think the next few months I don't think anything's going to. I think there's going to be more. I think there's going to be more that happens, more that comes out.
So in the 10 years you've decided to focus on boxing, you think we're going up? You think we're improving? You think it's the boxing scene's better?
Well, there's more boxing accessible to watch now, definitely in the UK, than there ever has been before. I mean, there's almost too many people covering it and not enough fighters, because it's yeah. I mean, you've got so this summer, for example, Matchroom leaves Sky to go with DAZN, which was kind of inevitable, I thought. You know, because otherwise, what was it all for? If Eddie wasn't going to at least give that a try, and they were obviously going to put a lot of money on the table, he kind of had to do it, really. Everything has its price, and he believes in it, so they went and did that. Sky signed with a new promoter. Sowlands have signed with Wasserman, and then you've kind of got this situation where Sky's new promoter, Boxer, and Wasserman are essentially kind of trying to sign the same people. And I'm not sure there's almost not enough to go around. You know, it's that kind of situation. And then you've got the Olympians, who you'd have thought some of them would have turned pro by now and signed with a promoter, but no. Caroline Dubois is signed with Boxer, who was Sky's new promoter, but nobody else has yet. Fraser Clarke, I see, has teamed up with AJ's management company 258, but they're not his promoter. So there's been a big bidding war, I guess, might not be quite the right, that probably is the right phrase for it, but there's a lot of people chasing them as well, because getting an Olympian is it's a big thing. It's somebody you can build, and somebody who, if they've medalled, people will know who they are. But that's an interesting situation too, because they're all still yet to make up their mind where they're going to go. And I'd imagine the reason for that is because there are so many people trying to sign them, whereas previously you would either go with Frank or you go with Eddie, and that was kind of that. Whereas now it's different. You know, their heads are probably spinning because they've got offers from all over the place, and it's difficult to know what to do. You know, you speak to any fighter who turns pro, particularly after an Olympics, particularly if they've medalled. I remember Macklin telling me that when he turned pro, he'd won the ABAs when he was 18. He didn't go to the Olympics or anything like that, but that was a big deal. And he just didn't know what was happening. You know, he's getting an offer from this place, an offer from that place. He didn't really have anybody to ask because his amateur coach didn't really know. And then if you do ask someone, can you trust them? Because you don't really know them. They seem to know a lot, but they're going to have an angle. It's really, really difficult. It's really, really difficult for them. And it would be good if there was just some kind of, if there was somewhere they could go for some impartial advice from someone who's got no kind of agenda. I don't know if that's something that people will look at in future. Maybe I'm always reluctant to put stuff on the Board of Control, because everybody always says when there's any kind of problem, like, what the British Boxing Board of Control going to do about it? I mean, they've got enough to do, but I just wonder. And then American promoters are interested in GP fighters as well. Top Rank, I think, could probably be interested in a few of them. I don't know that for a fact, but I imagine they probably would be. And maybe some other. Golden Boy have signed UK fighters in the past, haven't they? Go signed with Golden Boy. Michael Conlon went over to America originally, but although he was with Top Rank. And
Jay Quigley.
Yeah, Quigley. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I'll just be really interested to see what actually happens with them all, and where they are in their sort of headspace, because they're sort of by themselves, really, just having to make this decision. And it's a big one. It's important. You've got to get on the right ship to begin with. That's the really important thing. But then if somebody comes up to you and offers you a lot more money than somebody else has offered, maybe the ship's a little bit leaky, maybe it's not quite as seaworthy as some other ones, you might just think, well, maybe I'll just do that. It's tricky. It's tricky. I don't know if the same thing's going on in America. I don't really know. Well, I mean, it's different there because Duke Reagan and Keyshawn Davis, who medalled, they're already professionals, aren't they? So, their futures were already done. I don't know what Torres has done, the super heavy. I don't know whether he's made a decision.
Nothing yet that I've seen.
It's just all taking a really long time.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. Maybe it's a job for Andy Clarke Advisory Services. Maybe you start your own little company and you can advise them which steps to take.
Oh God, no! I'd stay out of that. I'm not getting involved in that snake pit. Absolutely no chance.
Going on to the previews for this weekend, Saturday the 13th of November, Sheffield Arena on DAZN out here in the US. We have Kid Galahad's back, making his first defense of his IBF featherweight title against Kiko Martinez, who always amazes me when I look how old he actually is. He feels like he's been around for like he should be in his late 40s.
Yeah, I know. People have been a bit down on that fight, but I think it's an okay fight, to be honest, because you win the title. I think it's just kind of an accepted fact of life, isn't it? That you take a voluntary first up, and I think Kiko Martinez is absolutely fine because everybody knows who he is. I thought he beat Zelfa Barrett, but he didn't get the decision. Yeah. And so he's got some reasonable kind of form in recent times on that front. So I think that's okay. I don't see any way that he beats Kid Galahad. Kid Galahad is one of these fighters who he was always going to struggle to get opportunities because no one's ever going to give someone like him a voluntary. It's just never going to happen. He got the mandatory against Warrington, gave him a really, really hard fight. And then, of course, got to fight for a vacant title. And that's how it was always going to be for him. And now he's got the title. He needs to make it work for him. And I'm absolutely convinced that he will, because he is in that category that we talked about earlier. He's pure boxing. He lives it and breathes it. He's obsessed with it. I heard him on Tris Dixon's podcast, and it was a really interesting listen because you could see how switched on he is to the business side of it. You could see how realistic he is about how it all works, how it really is just a big game of snakes and ladders, and how he knows that now he's got the title, he cannot take his eye off the ball now, because if he gets beaten, like I say, he's going to have to work his way back into mandatory again. That's what he'll have to do, and that'll take a while. It's taken him a while to get here, but he's a strong, strong fighter, and I think he'll have too much for Martinez. And after the fight, people will probably say, "Oh well, we told you so." It's he wasn't any kind of an opponent, but like I say, I don't see anything wrong with that fight as a first defense voluntary. I think it's fine.
And it's a strong division. There's some good names, some big fights that he can have now that he's got a strap.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been strong for a while, hasn't it? It's been strong for a while. I mean, it's fascinating what happened with Warrington. I mean, I don't think he really wanted to fight Galahad again anyway, to be perfectly honest with you, because they just don't really get on, and I don't think he would have wanted him to get another opportunity. But there are good fights for him. Gary Russell's not going to fight this year, is he now? I don't think. So he's a one-a-year man, but and people criticise him for that. And I've been one of them in the past, but he's making decent money. He's looking after himself. Yes, it would be better if he was more active, but he's doing it his way. He's doing it his way. I don't think it's great if you've got a belt that's only boxed for once a year. But you've got Navarrete, haven't you, with the WBO? He's a very exciting fighter to watch. That'll be a really good fight. Michael Conlon against Lee Wood has just been made. We're waiting to see where that'll be. I kind of expect that probably to be in Ireland or New York, maybe, because that's where it'll make the most money. But Lee Wood's an unbelievable story, because I remember it would have been early 2018. he just hadn't been able to get any fights at all. And he signed with Dave Colwell as his manager. Dave got him on some Sky shows. He won a Commonwealth title in a very comfortable knockover job. Then he went into the golden contract, lost to Jazza Dickens, but then got a British title fight and won it. And then all of a sudden he's got a world title fight and won. And then Matchroom put in a big purse bid for that fight, and his share of it's 825 grand. I mean, it's just incredible how things could work out for people sometimes if they stick to it and don't kind of lose the faith. So I've really enjoyed that. That's a really, I don't know him particularly well, but I know I did some of his early fights, and I spoke to him a bit when he was kind of in the middle of nowhere, really. And now look at him. I'm looking forward to that, actually. Conlan against Leewood. I've seen Conlan a couple of times. I've followed him in the amateurs, and I've been around him a bit, and I quite fancy him to beat Leewood, I think, probably. But then again, Leewood did the unexpected, didn't he, against Chan Zhu? But there are good fights out there for Galahad, and he'll want to maximise that belt now and make money.
Also on that card, Chris Billum-Smith, 13-1 against, you may have to help me on this one, Dylan, is it Breton?
Yeah, I don't know loads about him, but I think this is another kind of good example. He won that title against Tommy McCarthy. Good fight, really good fight. And this, I've been kind of out of the loop the last couple of weeks because the World Amateurs is quite intense. Kind of like you go to the venue at about midday, stay there till about 10 o'clock, and you haven't really got time for anything else in your head. But you'd imagine that he has been selected not because he's expected to cause too many problems, and again, that's fine. He's just won that title. He's got European, British and Commonwealth. And it's been interesting to see what's happened with him too, because I've been to the gym to see him a few times. Again, he's very switched on. He understands the business, I think. He's got a really good trainer in Shane McGuigan. He's very dedicated, and he will get the absolute last drop out of himself. You can guarantee that with him. However far he goes, he'll have no regrets when it comes to the end of his career, because he'll know that he did everything right. Good fight against McCarthy, close fight. I remember him losing to Richard Rietpour, and I thought Rietpour did win that fight. I did that fight, and I know Chris thought he won, and it was quite close. But he's just improving all the time. So, yeah, he's somebody you look at, and he definitely deserves all the success that he's got over the last few months.
Just needs to a little bit better defense. He just gets hit a little bit too easily, Billum-Smith.
Yeah, that's a fair comment, I would say. I mean, he's in the gym with a Coley now. Obviously, they're both in the same place, so I think that's really going to help him. And at Cruiser, there are some good domestic fights out there. Rietpour signed with Sky now. He boxes Duradola on the 20th, so week on Saturday. I don't really know how much. It's hard to know kind of how much Duradola's got left, but that could be a very difficult fight for him.
What happened with Rietpour? Was it just management issues? Is that why we haven't seen him out?
Yeah, so he won the British title. He won a vacant British title against Jack Massey back at the end of 2019. And then COVID came, and we were always expecting to see him on a Dillian White undercard. The Povetkin fight, the first one, and then the second one, and it just never happened. And when Dillian split with Mark Tibbs, he did the same thing and hooked up with Angel Fernandez. So he's been working with him for a long spell before he had his first fight back at the start of October. And he's been a really interesting one to watch because they put him in hard fights early. He was losing against Sam Hyde and then hit him with a right hand and brought up this huge swelling and won the fight. And then they put him in with McCarthy. Again, you had to pick McCarthy on experience. I think he probably got McCarthy at quite a good time. But again, he stopped him. He beat Billum-Smith. He's just on a roll of taking difficult fights and winning them. So you can't knock him for anything that he's done. I think he's still learning, definitely. But he goes about it the right way, and he's got a big right hand. So I was kind of surprised that they gave up the British. I thought that maybe a good move for him would have been to kind of bed in a bit at that level, because he got up there quite quickly with this series of difficult fights. I thought they might bed him.
I'll call you back in a minute.
I thought they might bed him in a bit more at British level, but they chose not to. They vacated the title and have moved on. And Sky are kind of putting quite a lot behind him. He's I think they took him around his old estate the other day to do like a feature on him, that kind of thing. They're trying to pump him up, and I can understand why, because he talks well, great physical specimen, good looking guy, and he's got knockout power.
Shane McGuigan, probably one of the best up and coming coaches in the UK, you believe?
Yeah, I would say so. He had to deal with all the normal criticism which comes with having a surname like his, and people saying that things are handed to you and that Frampton was a ready-made fighter and all that kind of stuff. And you just have to cope with that. You just have to deal with it. And he has. I've always gotten fine with Shane. He seemed to gather a bit of reputation for himself early on as being a bit kind of prickly. I never really found him like that. He's just not. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't jump all over you when you see him, but fine. Like I don't do that either. It's perfectly friendly. You can go down to the gym. It's not an issue. It's not a problem. And you look at the fighters he's brought through. George Grove speaks highly of him. David Hay spoke highly of him. Luke Campbell, same thing. People look at Josh Taylor and say, "Oh, well, Josh Taylor was a brilliant amateur," and all the rest of it. But how many good amateurs go on and do what Josh Taylor's done? Not that many. And you've got to give the trainer who was with him as a professional from the start some credit for that. You just have to. I mean, it's ludicrous not to. And, he's got a Coley now. A Coley has definitely improved a lot since he's been with Shane. Ellie Scotney's just moved over there. I think Ellie Scotney's a really good fighter. She kind of disappeared for a bit. She was with Adam Booth, and now she's not. Not sure what happened there, but there's definite possibilities for her. And he's got these other couple of kids, the Azims, who are good fighters too. I've seen them a couple of times on MTK show. So he never wants to have too many, but at the minute he's got a few. You just look at the results. It's the same with Ben Davison. People would say, "Oh, well, Tyson Fury was ready-made and all the rest of it." Josh Taylor came to him as a unified champion. But then you look at Lee Wood, and you look at Lee McGregor, and you look at other fighters that he's got, and you can't argue with the results.
No, you can't, especially with Shane survived that dramatic split from Carl Frampton. I did wonder whether a lot of fighters were just going to listen to those rumors in the court case and not want to be around him. But both of them talk very well when you hear them talk about the sport. Their analysis is always great, the way that they break down fights. Yeah, I definitely think the two, very good coaches. And like you say, the proof's in the pudding, and they've shown it.
Yeah, they have. I mean, it was quite kind of brutal what happened with Ben Davison and Fury, but Fury was proved to be right, wasn't he? He's moved to Sugar Hill, and look what happened in the second fight against Wilder. Would that have happened if Ben Davison was in the corner? No one will ever know, but I don't think. But he knew what he wanted, Tyson. He decided, I think I probably could have been a bit more aggressive in that fight. And if I had been more aggressive in that fight, I reckon I could have taken him out. And his dad was saying the same thing. And he's quite a big influence. And I think he was a bit bruised by that, Ben, to be honest. And how could you not be? Because he is really young. Like, people forget. He's like, I don't know if he's even 30 yet. He might be, but if he is, only just. And Shane's kind of roughly the same age, although he's been a high-profile trainer for a long time. And fighters talk to each other, don't they? And if he wasn't any good, if either of them weren't any good, then people wouldn't go to them. Josh Taylor with two world title belts, with a Grand Slam unification coming up, as it was when he went to Shane, when he went to Ben. That's not going to happen if you don't know what you're doing. It's just not going to happen.
No, that's true. That's true. Moving on, that card, Terry Harper 11-0 against Alicia Baumgardner 10-1. This is for the WBC and IBO super featherweight. I could actually see an upset here.
Yeah, she's pretty good, actually, Alicia Baumgardner. Yeah, she definitely, that's a good fight. That's a good fight. Terry Harper has been in good fights. Tasha Jonas has just signed with Sky, interestingly, with Boxer. And there's the Super Series brewing for next year with the super featherweights with the women. So it'll be interesting to see who they get in that. I don't know how far down the road they've got with that yet, Calla and Nissa Sauerland, but I know that they always wanted to wait until the world was just in a more predictable place, because there wasn't really any point in them trying to do it whilst things are are as they've been, and I totally get that. I mean, I would expect Terry Harper to win that fight, but there are great fights out there in that division. People would love to see her fight Jonas again. Michaela Mayer is well known over here because she's got plenty to say, but she's backed it up. She's good to watch. She's with Top Rank. There's a lot going on in that division. Pursoon is super featherweight now, I think, as well. Always was really, but kind of boxed at lightweight anyway. So I think they've chosen wisely with that division. And Terry Harper's, I remember covering her first fight on Sky. I think she was off TV originally. Then she was on Facebook. Then Josh Kelly, David Avanesian fell out right at the last minute. So this would have been late 2018, I think. And she's promoted to opening the TV part of the card. And, no nerves, nothing. Steffi Budd had been telling us for ages, how good she was. And she immediately just impressed straight away. And yeah, I think that division in particular for the women, that's why they've chosen it, the Sauerlands, Wasserman Boxing now for the Super Series, because I think it should really deliver. But I mean, I would expect I would pick her to win on the weekend, I think.
It's definitely a good fight. A lot of the women's fights, you watch it and it is like a dominant A side. Yeah, but this is a good fight and could put a, stop to, I think, the Terry Harper, Michaela Mayer fight that I think everyone was kind of looking forward to.
Yeah, and that's it would be great if some of those get made. I mean, I would love to see Terry Harper and Natasha Jonas fight again. I saw Steffi Bull talking about it on Twitter during the week, and he said that we signed our half and then they went missing. And you never really know what the truth of these matters is, because unless you're on the inside, it's impossible to tell. But Tasha, when she signed with Boxer, made a comment on Twitter, I think it was this week, basically saying, finally I'm free of all the politics now, I can just fight. So I don't know what was going on behind the scenes there with her promotionally. But I think they'd been thinking they were going to get her for a while, and it took longer than they thought. Sky and Boxer, but they've got her now, and she was doing some punditry the other week. She's good at that. So she comes with a kind of good all-round package, but she desperately wants to win a world title because she's been so close a couple of times. Great fight with Harper the first time. I thought she just nicked it, but I wasn't scandalised by the draw. Great fight against Katie Taylor. I thought Katie Taylor did win that fight. I thought that was a fair decision, and I think Jonas, agreed with that. But again, she wants that. She wants that world title. And Hyun Mi Choi is another one that's super featherweight who signed with Matchroom. Towards the end of last year, I think. So she would be. She's in that mix as well. Although with Jonas moving to a different promoter, all of that just muddies waters, I guess, which is why it would be great if in the Super Series they were just all in it. Yeah.
Yeah. You did wonder if that was Eddie Hearn and Joe Gallagher dust-up. Is that why she wasn't getting what she wanted?
I mean, that's always possible, I suppose. It's always possible. He's been relatively quiet recently, Joe, actually. But that's always possible. He's got Charlie Edwards up training with him now. So that's a kind of recent addition. Callum Johnson. Callum Smith has gone, obviously. But Joe will, Joe says every now and again, when this crop of fighters finish, I'll finish with them. Nah, I don't buy that.
Moving on to the US, we've got from the Honda Center, Anaheim, live on DAZN, Jaime Munguia, 37-0 against Gabe Rosado. This is a crazy record. 26-13-1 for the WBO Intercontinental Middleweight title. Good fight. Gabe Rosado seems to be in a bit of a purple patch since changing trainer to Freddie Roach.
Yeah, and you'd imagine that this is... You can't really see this fight not delivering a good fight, can you? Because of the way they both go about it. It's kind of impossible to see this being anything other than a good fight. And Rosado, I remember spending a bit of time with him when he came over to fight Martin Murray. I think he was training down at the Peacock for a bit in Canning Town in East London. Fight was in Liverpool. Chatted to him and his trainer a reasonable amount during the course of the week. And Rosado's one of those people you just kind of like him. You can't not have respect for the resume and the opponents that he's fought. And to see him get the win against Mela Kuziev, wasn't it? That was huge for him, because he had a couple where He got a draw where I know he definitely felt that he won. Maciej as well was one where he really very nearly turned it around right at the very end, and he didn't get it on the cards, and that was fair enough. But he nearly Jacobs, and there's he's done a lot, and he's generally one of those people who will fight anyone. And he's put himself into another one of those fights straight away because he wants he wants a shot at the world title, doesn't he? Before he eventually decides to hang them up, but that's a very fan friendly fight. You would be astonished if that. Well, having said that, we thought the fight between him and Martin Murray would be, a can't miss fight, and actually it was quite dull.
Yeah, which is kind of strange, isn't it? When you get those two types of styles, you think, well, they're both just going to stand there until one of them drops. It's the only thing they know.
Yeah, and that isn't what happened. Like they kind of boxed, and I think Rosado I think he'd said to Murray during the week that he was the better boxer, and Murray wasn't, a particularly skillful fighter, and they decided to kind of have a boxing match, and Martin Murray won it sort of quite comfortably, I thought. And at the final bell, Rosado was kicking off about the decision and all the rest of it, but there was nothing wrong with the decision. But I don't see that. I don't see that happening in this one. I really don't. When you make a fight like that and you stick it on the top of your bill, or chief support, or wherever you want to put it, I think you're as confident as you're ever going to be that it's going to be a really good fight.
Do you rate Munguia?
I mean, I do, but I'm not sure if he's really in that kind of top bracket, to be honest with you. I think against the top guys, he's probably going to fall short. But he is very good to watch. He is very good to watch, and that's it's hugely important, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. TV fighter Gabe Rosado's made a career of it.
Exactly.
Moving on to the news and notes for this week. The fight that's probably come about 5 years too late. Canelo-Plant did an interview saying that he signed his side of the deal to fight Amir Khan. Do you see that going ahead, Andy?
I mean, that's been brewing for such a long time now, but there have been more positive noises about it over the last 6 months. Eddie was talking about it a while ago, and it would either go there or it would go to Sky. I think there were talks at one point that got to quite an advanced stage, and maybe they wanted a bit too much money on the guarantee. That was something that I heard on the grapevine. I would still watch it. I would definitely still watch it. I know it's well past its sell-by date and all that kind of thing, but I think they would have been well matched in their prime, and I think they would still be well matched now, although not anything like what they were, but I think they're at similar stages. I think it would be a good match. I think it would be an interesting fight, and I would be I would definitely tune into that. I really would struggle to try and pick a winner, to be honest, because they both got plenty of miles on the clock. But there is a general kind of mutual loathing there, which is what has stopped the fight being made previously. But now you could say that it would be a cash out fight, and it probably would be, but people would still want to watch that here. Amir Khan is a massive name, in UK boxing, and rightly so, and has been for a long, long time. I've always been I love what he's done down the years. I mean, he's come up short sometimes, obviously, but at the same time, he's been brilliant to watch. He's an entertaining character. Canelo-Plant, for me, is a case of what might have been, because I really do think 6-7 years ago when he beat Porter, he was a very, very good fighter, just a really good all-round fighter. And then he had a succession of underwhelming fights, basically. And in the end, stepped up and fought Golovkin, and he would have got paid, but I think he admits now it was a mistake. I don't think his trainer ever really wanted him to do it, but he could understand why he did do it, because the money hadn't really come at that point. So, yeah, I mean, they're both still well matched.
Yeah, I'm sure it's one of those that, a lot of people will say, I'm not going to buy it. It's past its sell-by date. But, we always give in, and we always end up watching it. And I'm sure the press conferences will be good, just due to the general hatred for each other.
Yeah, they'll pump it up. And like I said, Amakan's a massive name, so people will watch it. People will watch it. I think about mates of mine who are kind of floating boxing fans. They definitely watch that. Yeah. They would definitely watch that. They wouldn't think twice about paying 20 quid to watch that.
He's one of the nicest boxers I've met.
Amate.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He went into the jungle here. That won't mean anything to people what they're listening who aren't from the UK. But there's this celebrity show called I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, where they stick them all in the jungle in Australia and make them do a kind of like ludicrous, demeaning tasks like get buried alive and stuff like that, and search for stars for meals for their campmates and all this kind of thing. It's actually pretty entertaining. I always watch it. I'm not really anti-reality TV, but I don't really watch it. Apart from that, I do watch that. And he was on that, and he was great on that. He was great on that. He was really, really funny. And I think people just, saw another side to him, because a lot of the time David Hay did it a few years before, and it was the same thing. People thought David Hay was just this flash Harry going into, before that. And then who you are will come out in that show because the cameras are on you 24 hours a day. And Amate Khan just came across as a very kind of like playful, good-humoured, just quite fun bloke, really. And I don't know him really. Colleagues of mine know much better than me, but I'm told that that's what he's always been. So yeah, I think those two, and they're veterans of the business too. So they would make that work. They would make it work with the build-up. Stick that at Old Trafford. I think they could probably. Could they fill Old Trafford at 75,000? I don't know, but it's way too big for an arena. Definitely.
That'd be some way to go out for the loser, or maybe even both of them. Maybe the winner may even go out, but the winner may stay around for one more.
But if it was a good fight, they could do it again. You see, the fact that it's past its sell-by date, to me, it is a shame that they didn't do it a few years ago. But like I say, I think they are still well matched. So it could still be a really, really good fight between two guys who aren't what they used to be, but it could still be really entertaining. And if it is, and it's close, they could do it again. I think one thing that might have stopped Amate doing it previously is that I genuinely don't think, I'm not sure he could live with a defeat to Canelo-Plant, and vice versa. I think that might be one reason why they've been a bit reticent, because they just can't, the thought of it is just, maybe for both of them, is just a bit much, losing to that guy. It might just eat them up for the rest of their life. I think there's definitely been an element of that. But if it was a good fight, they could do it again. There's just no reason not to do it again if the demand is there. And I think it would be. We've all seen fights where you look at like Gatti Ward, and people always pick that out as an epic trilogy and brilliant fights, because they were, but they weren't like, they were. It's not the same, but they weren't that. No one was pretending that was a fight between two elite level fighters, and it was brilliant. I'm not saying we're going to get that, but we could get something really good in that fight. It could happen. It could be terrible. Maybe one of them's completely shot and the other one just wins easily. I mean, who knows? But it's definitely going to be interesting to find out.
I'm trying to rack my brain to see if I can remember, where does the hatred stem from?
I'm not even really sure, to be honest. I'm not even really sure. I think it's just because they were in the same weight division and they were circling for quite a long time. And I think Amate probably said a few relatively demeaning things about Cal and the level of opponents he'd boxed, whereas Amate was over in America and he'd unified some titles at super lightweight, and he was in bigger fights and he was a bigger name and he was the A side, and just all that usual kind of bullshit, basically. I think they've traded some fairly kind of, I think they've probably traded some insults at times, the likes of which are pretty difficult, that you can't really take back. I think that's probably happened. I don't know for sure, but you know how fighters are. There's a line, and if you cross it, then you can't go back across it. You're there then, and something's going to have to happen. And in their world, that means that they're going to have to fight. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet, but I think we probably are as close to that as we've been maybe ever, because I never got the feeling really before now that it was really ever going to happen. I think Amate was just like tossing it out there every now and again, just to annoy Canelo-Plant more than anything else, with no intention of actually doing it, because he's made a lot more money in his career than Kell. I'd imagine he must have done. But he had his crypto night the other week, Amir Khan, didn't he, in Dubai, where crypto traders had a I don't know what it was about.
I'm sold. Okay, I'll buy it. I'll buy the Khan-Brook.
And I think a lot of people would.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it'll still do decent numbers. If people are paying to see some random MMA v boxer fights and YouTubers fight each other,
exactly,
I'm sure that we'll pay to see some, experienced, shall we say, boxers fight each other.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're the man in the know on the amateur scene. So as we just spoke about before, we've got a whole host of amateurs, now turning pro after the Olympics. So Andy, who would you pick as the guys to, do well in the pro ranks?
From the GB guys?
Yeah, from the GB guys that are hopefully turning over.
It's always tricky, isn't it? It's always tricky because you never quite know how well someone's going to transition. And also, if you've had quite a long amateur career now, there can be some miles on the clock. And some of them can turn over and there's not all that much more to come. And you don't really know that until you kind of see them in the earlier stages, and they will want to move them quick. I think with all of them, they'll want to move them pretty quick. With someone like Whittaker, I think they might want to take a little bit more time with him because he's not been on the squad. He hadn't been in that system for quite so long. And I think stylistically, there is quite a lot of transition to do with him. But I think longer term, I think he would be a longer term project, but I think he could do well. Fraser, the big super heavyweight, Fraser Clarke, he would look to try and move quick because of the age he is. And he has had a lot of amateur fights, quite a lot of WSB fights. So I wouldn't say there are miles on the clock necessarily, but I think he would look to move quick. The McCormacks, Pat McCormack is probably the one that most people would say would transition most quickly to professional boxing. I think there's a reasonable amount he needs to add because he has got, I wouldn't necessarily say it's kind of like a stand-up traditional amateur style, but he's got a very kind of GB style, like 2-3 punch combinations in and out. But he is a very good fighter. Gamal, obviously, he got a gold medal. Again, I think they would look to move him pretty quickly because he's in the lower weights as well. There's not as much competition to go through there. I think if I had to pick one who I thought would probably do best out of those, it would probably be Whittaker, but it will take longer. I think the others, there might not be that much more to come. Like I could be wrong about that, but I look at someone like Fowler, who I like a lot, very dedicated pro. When he turned over, he'd had a lot of amateur fights. There was a bit of damage. He'd had quite a lot of cuts, things like that. And I wouldn't say he hasn't improved. Of course he has. And I thought he did pretty well in that Liam Smith fight for a spell. But I think he's quite a good example of the kind of fighter who can come out of a longish amateur career and there maybe isn't as much more to come from him as there would be from a Coley, for example, who had a much shorter amateur career. And there was a lot more to learn and maybe a lot more to kind of give. So I would probably pick Whittaker, but it would take longer out of that crop. I've always liked McGrail, and he's gone under the radar because he didn't do it in the Olympics, but he's got 2 bronze medals in World Championships. He's a good fighter, and he has made his pro debut already. He's not signed with a promoter, but he has boxed, and he was on a Matchroom show. I'd probably say Whittaker. And maybe a little kind of like sneaky one for McGrail. With Gamal, it's kind of harder to say because he will have to move quicker because of the weight division he's in. They just don't really tend to hang around at the lower weights. But even though he won a gold medal, there won't be quite as much spotlight on him as a pro when he gets further up the ladder because there isn't as much attention on the lower weights, although that has kind of changed, you could argue, in recent years with super flyweights and stuff like that. With the females, I think they're going to. I think Cara Still is going to turn pro. I think Lauren Price is going to turn pro. Caroline Dubois already has. She makes her debut a week on Saturday. And there's all sorts of potential there for them to do really well because, as we know, the depth isn't there in women's boxing in the same way that it is at men's. So there's definite possibilities for them to move quick and fight for major titles relatively soon. You would probably say. I mean, it's just what I'm always looking for in the Olympics really is outside of medalists is who's young. Maybe hasn't had that many fights, maybe is a bit raw, maybe got knocked out in the quarterfinals or ran into a really good fighter quite early, but showed you something. Those are the ones I'm always kind of looking out for. I saw a few at the World Championships recently, actually, who you look at them and you think, yeah, if somebody got hold of him, Coley was always the kind of example for me of the last lot because I just thought, and I know that he's gone on and won a world title and it just makes him look like a smart ass, but I didn't predict he was definitely going to win a world title, but I just thought he's only had 25 amateur fights and there was obviously, he could just get a lot better. Whereas, like I say, with ones who've had a really long amateur career, you don't really know how much better they're going to get.
The transition of the style as well, I bet as well, from point scoring to, sitting down on your punches and being able to transition to the pro style.
Yeah, that's not as big a thing as it used to be because they've had the 10-point must since kind of late 2013. And I saw a lot of fights in Serbia over a couple of weeks at the Worlds where, they were very pro style. So it's not as bad as it used to be, but the transition, but it is still different because you can still win a fight in AIBA boxing by hitting the target, by landing scoring blows. There's not as much emphasis on how hard they land. Whereas in pro boxing, obviously it's not about hitting the target. It's about hurting your opponent. That's what it is. You sign that contract. You're going to try and hurt me. I'm going to try and hurt you. That's what it is. And you need to get used to that. And I think with someone like Whittaker, that might take a little bit of time because he is a skillful hit and don't get hit kind of fighter. And that's great because you don't want to get hit. But you do have to develop that kind of that power and that different technique, like you say. But that transition isn't as bad as it used to be because when it was computer point scoring, it was a bit like fencing at times, kind of like in out, and you're almost coming off the punch before you've even thrown it because you want to throw it, land it, even if it lands just like a little kind of like kiss almost, and then get back out as quick as you can. And you do still see fighters doing that. I saw fighters still doing that at the World Championships, but you look at them and you know that they're not really going to make professionals because that style is just not going to work. But then you also know that they're probably not going to turn pro. That might not really be in their mind because they know that what they're doing works in the arena they're in. And like we were saying before, now there's prize money for it. And if you're in a national federation where you've got a good setup and you've got some funding, then there's less incentive to do it if you're the kind of fighter who stylistically it's not really going to suit.
Do you think your fight will kind of have the advantage, turning pro with having his brothers to lean on?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Definitely. I think so. Cal and Gamal are both with Matchroom, so you would imagine that Gamal will probably end up with Matchroom unless someone can kind of do a deal to take all three. I think that's probably what you would have to do or try and do. Well, maybe not have to, but I think if you could put that kind of package together that was attractive for Cal and Gamal and get Galal as well as part of that and stick them all on a show in Birmingham, that kind of thing, make a big deal out of them, you could maybe do that. But you'd imagine the Matchroom would be the front runner there. And definitely like Cal's done really, really well, won a world title and kept it for a good spell. Gamal, there's still plenty to come from him, I think, because he won the European title and then Jason Cunningham was great against him that night, but he boxed terribly that night. Like he came out thinking he could walk through him. He just got it all wrong. He's much better than that. So I think, there's still quite a lot left in both of them, I think. And I think Gamal would definitely want to be boxing on the same shows as them. I mean, I think that would be pretty obvious, really.
Interesting times. Like we were touching on before we pressed record, it's strange to see that, the Olympics is, finished and over and we haven't really seen too many signed.
No, It is a bit of a strange scenario because we were talking about it before, and they find themselves in this position where everybody knows they want to turn pro, but nobody really knows what the protocol is. What do you do if you want to try and sign one of them? Who do you go through? Well, there isn't anyone to go through because they haven't signed with a management team. A couple of them have now, so presumably you would then go through them. But maybe they've already been talking to promoters. I've had people call me and say, how do I start a conversation with whoever? And I just say to them, look, there doesn't appear to be any protocol here. If you've got a contact for them, just call them, because I don't know what else to tell you. If you're a bit squeamish about that for some reason, then I guess you could try and go through their old amateur coach or try and go through GB if there's a route through there. But I don't think there really is, because the coaches there can't get involved because they're contracted to GB Boxing. So it is all a bit of boxing's a wild west anyway. But that situation, it's almost like you get pushed out of the doors of your amateur gym, and you're kind of like just standing by the roadside, promoters driving past, and whose card you get in. You know, it is a really interesting one, and I know lots of conversations have been had. And like I said, they'll be getting a lot of offers. But I do feel for them a bit, because there isn't really, if there was some kind of advisory body, almost like I said before, I think that might help. Because as savvy as you might think you are, because you've been around a long time and you know a lot of people in pro boxing, and you're probably quite close with some managers or whoever who might have been advising you whilst you were an amateur. So you could have that relationship already from there, because some of the management companies, they do it right, in my opinion, you know, the right way, which is they might start a relationship with an amateur. They don't want anything from them. You know, there's nothing financial, but they're just there for advice, and they just try and be like honest with them, hoping that when they turn professional, they'll remember that they've always been kind of straight with them, and that's kind of the way in. But then inevitably you put in all that groundwork, and then maybe later on you just get big-footed by someone else who just comes in with a bigger offer. But something's got to happen soon, because, like I said, McGrail signed with MTK before the Olympics, and he's boxed. Caroline Dubois signed with Boxer, and she's boxing a week on Saturday. Fraser signed with 258, and he expects to make his debut early next year. But the rest of them, I've got no idea what's going on with them. Absolutely none.
Strange situation. You think, you know, strike whilst the iron's hot, you know, finish the pro ranks, you're still in everybody's thoughts, you know, get out on a Matchroom show, and, you know, all the kind of the casual fans still remember you.
Yeah. I mean, it did take a little while for some of them it took actually quite a long time to turn pro last time. I think he stayed on the GB squad until March the next year, because I think he might have had a couple of injuries he needed to clear up, and Kez Ashfaq was the same, and their funding ran out the next year. That was when their contract was up, like in March the next year. So Josh waited for that. I think he finished his degree maybe or something like that, and then turned over and didn't make his pro debut until like July 2017. So it's not completely unusual, but most of them did move quicker than that. Because like you say, it's that kind of recognition, that brand value of, but then again, in the industry they're in, no one's going to forget that. So that the value of that for their deal will always be the same. I guess you're just waiting to see who offers you what. I mean, it's as simple as that, really. And how often you're going to box and that kind of thing, and what kind of card you're going to be on, and all of this. I mean, there's loads of things that go into it.
And there's plenty to choose from, like we were just talking about. There's plenty of promotions, TV networks. You know, boxing's kind of hot right now.
Yeah, there's loads to choose from, and that probably doesn't really help. Yeah, if there wasn't as much choice, it'd probably be a bit more straightforward for them. But now, I mean, if you were choosing between Matchroom and Sky, for example, the Matchroom and Boxer, so DAZN and Sky, it's a pretty straightforward equation. Like with Matchroom, with DAZN, you've got Matchroom, so you've got Eddie, who is, you know, one of the best promoters in the world. He would say the best. You know, that's a matter of opinion. And there's certainly nobody better at the frontman role than him. Absolutely not. In talking up his own fighters, definitely not. And you look at the fights he's put on, you know, he's right up there. Of course he is. and DAZN have got a big budget and their coverage is good. You know, I like the UK coverage, but you're not going to get the same exposure as you get on Sky. If you sign for Sky, their stable isn't quite so strong. They don't have Eddie Hearn, but a lot more people watch it at the minute, and a lot more people will know who you are, and you'll get your name out there. What the difference might be in terms of what you got paid, I've got no idea. I mean, you might guess that you get more with DAZN because of that budget they were talking about when they made the move, but Sky are putting a lot of resources behind it. So maybe they'd be looking to kind of get a couple rather than sign 5, but put together pretty significant packages for them. So it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And I'm sure that plenty of them, if not all of them, are kind of in that situation where they're having to weigh up the kind of like, do I go for the Sky machine or Eddie Hearn, basically? I don't know. I mean, he'd be a difficult man to say no to. I'd imagine that in a kind of one-on-one meeting, him selling Matchroom and himself, not that he needs to, and DAZN to you, I'd imagine that would be pretty persuasive. But then again, if they took you to the Sky campus, which is really impressive, and took you around there and all the offices and all the rest of it, that'd be pretty impressive too. And yeah, that's a difficult decision. Then you've got Frank Warren too, who's been in the game forever. And you know, that's another option. I'd just be interested to see what eventually happens with it. The same thing isn't really happening in the US, is it? Because the team is smaller. A couple of them were already pros anyway. So it's a different kind of situation. But in the UK, it is. We're all kind of wondering when they're going to take the plunge, because they're going to need to do it soon.
Yeah, they don't seem to get snapped up like they do in the UK. I don't know whether maybe that's just due to us, remembering like Audley Harrison, Amir Khan. So maybe we kind of like class them slightly differently in the UK, where it's not the same out here.
No, I kind of get that. Yeah, I kind of get that sense. You get the odd one like Shakur, who came through and he won everything as a youth, like Youth Olympics, World Youth Championships, got a silver medal in the Olympics when he was 19, and everybody's going to be all over him. And Top Rank have always traditionally been the ones who've signed the big amateurs, haven't they? They've got that tradition going back to like De La Hoya and before that, and Loma and endless names really. But I think Top Rank kind of like shop maybe a little bit more globally as well, because there's certain fighters that you can sell in America, like Central American, South American fighters who can pull a crowd. I don't know if they're quite so interested in kind of like Eastern European, Central Asian fighters anymore. I don't know if they've really, just across the board, not saying just with Top Rank, but I'm not really sure if they've created the kind of, what you're always hoping is that you'll sign someone like Golovkin or Loma, and they just have this kind of like mystique about them, and someone like Usyk, although I know he's not with an American promoter, but that kind of wizardry about them, that aura about them. But only a few of them really have it, and they're probably not really going to sell that many tickets anyway to start with. But that's not really a priority for them. You just try and get them on big shows as quick as you can and hope they catch the imagination. It's a tricky business because they've all got to bring some kind of commercial value or be really, really good, or a mixture of the two.
There's one American, Raheem Gonzalez, I believe he medaled recently.
Yeah. So he was in my ring. He got a gold at, what was he, light heavyweight? Yeah, light heavyweight. His fights were unbelievable. Like, he had a fight in the earlier stages against an Uzbek guy called Odiljon Aslanov, and real beast of a fighter, incredibly strong upper body, gets up close, kind of leans in, throws big kind of overhands and hooks. And I thought it wasn't looking great for Gonzalez, I didn't think. And then in the second round, he kind of went up close with him, took it up close with him, and I thought, this is a bad idea. But he got the win. Just kept banging him to the body and got the win. A terrific win. And then in the final, he was in with a Belarusian guy called Alexei Alfirov, really, really good boxer who put him down heavy in the first 30 seconds. And I don't think he ever really shook it off. I didn't get to speak to him about it afterwards, but it looked to me after that like he was fighting through a bit of a fog. And he just stood there and had it with him. And going into the final round, he needed to win the final round, but he needed to win it. He needed some 10-8s. 10-8s in AIBA boxing, you don't need to knock somebody down to get a 10-8. You know, a 10-9 is a close round win. 10-8 is a dominant round win. 10-7 is like complete domination. You don't see many of them. I think I had one in 2 weeks, but he needed a 10-8 basically to level up one of the cards. And then that judge would have to decide who they think wins without going into the intricacies of it. And he got one. He got a 10-8 with the Kazakh judge. He then voted for him and he won. And it was amazing. Like, I've never seen a turnaround like that. It just doesn't really happen. It just doesn't really happen. And it was very close. And the other guy was, you know, pretty livid about it. He obviously thought that he won, but there was nothing wrong with the decision. It was pure 50-50 at the end. It could have gone either way. And he just really, really dug it out. Because like I say, I don't think he ever really shook the knockdown off. But he just showed massive, massive balls. And he did that all the way through the competition. Jamal Harvey was another one. He got gold. He was brilliant. Beat a guy called Mirazizbek Mikhailov early on, who's an Asian champion. Roscoe Hill got a silver. He was really good. Amari Jones, he got a silver. He was really good. Vashawn Lee got a brilliant knockout, then ran into Andy Cruz, gave him a good fight. Jamar Talley at heavyweight was good. They were really good. Like, Billy Walsh has got a really good team. And like I said, if they will stick around for Paris, and I would expect that they will, then they're going to be a real force. I mean, it was good to see because the USA had a decent Olympics, but the previous years before that, things hadn't gone quite so well. And people were kind of questioning the system a bit. But, you know, they were, young team too, young team. And with someone like Gonzalez as well, there were plenty of people in this category, but it just caught my eye because he won the USA Olympic trials and then never even got to box to try and go to the Olympics because there was no America's qualifier. His ranking wasn't that great because he hadn't really boxed internationally that much. And so it was all done on rankings and he didn't make it. And that must have been absolutely just devastating. And he's like 25, I think. So this would have been the peak time to go to the Olympics. So to rebound like that he was kind of my fighter of the tournament, really, because I saw all his fights and the way he managed to turn a couple of them around was mega. I mean, I've like that final, like I say, that might be the best 3-round fight I've ever seen because technically you'll see kind of higher level contests, if you like, but it was a fight. Like, you don't always see that in the amateurs, but from the knockdown onwards, it was just a fight. And the other guy was kind of falling apart at the end. If it'd been a 5-round fight, he definitely would have won. But yeah, it was pretty spectacular stuff.
Nice guy as well, Raheem. You'll often see him at the fights in Vegas.
Yeah, he trains at the City Athletic, I think, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was a new one on me. As they pretty much all were. But $100,000 as well.
Right.
$100,000. I mean, I don't know really. I'm always kind of quite curious what happens with the prize money. It probably varies from country to country, whether the federation keeps it or whether, you know, and puts it into the system, or whether you keep it, or whether there's a split, or what goes on. But yeah, 100,000 US for a gold medal. I mean, that's a lot of money.
It'd be good for the podcast. Was it Billy Walsh?
Yeah, Billy. I was thinking about that this week. I said to Matt, "Do you know Billy Walsh?" Because Macklin knows everybody, particularly Irish people. And he said, "No, I don't." And it's with the time difference, it was a little bit short notice. But I think we probably will try and get him at some point because he's done a great job there. He's done a really good job there. I think maybe, he left the Irish system under a bit of a cloud. I mean, I don't think he really, he wanted some certain things and they weren't happening and that kind of thing. But he's revived that American system, because I remember going to the final qualifier for Rio, and it wasn't like they didn't have some good fighters in Rio. I mean, like Shakur was at Rio, for example, but I remember they had a few fighters in the final qualifier, and I was there doing it with Nate Campbell, and he was pretty disparaging about them, really. He just said that they just don't want it enough. And he said, and that's the problem with a lot of our amateurs now. They just don't like having this system in place, and the best of everything is it's good in a way, but also bad in another, because they just haven't got, his phrase was, they haven't got enough of the dog in them. And I think he kind of had a point at that stage, maybe, but not now. Definitely not now.
No, that'd be a very interesting episode to see the change, because obviously such a huge country with, big boxing pass, to see why they've been so stagnant over the last few years.
Yeah, Manny was quite interesting on that. Manny Robles, we had him on a few weeks ago when he was over for AJ Usyk. He had a fighter on the undercard, and I was asking him about the amateurs, because he was an amateur coach for a long time. Like, he was in that Team USA setup, and I said, what about the transition? And he said, well, in California it's easy. He says, because amateurs box like pros in California. That's how they're taught. So it's actually quite straightforward. And looking at the USA lads, like, they wouldn't really have. They were kind of like that. Like Jamal Harvey, for example, he was at featherweight, quite short for the weight, I guess, but stocky, and he wasn't really boxing with what you would describe as an amateur style. He could, if he needed to, get in and out, but generally speaking, he would plant his feet and punch hard. I think a few opponents fancy themselves as maybe being able to bully him a bit, because he does look quite small, but they couldn't, because he's got big, strong legs. And he would just set his feet and just let them have it. And he was accurate enough that nobody could really get on top of him. And yeah, they were kind of all like that, really. I mean, it is more that way. You do get certain countries, like a couple of Japanese fighters who won gold medals. They were a bit more kind of in and out, took the outside of the ring, would very, very quick dive in, dipping almost to the waist, land a jab to the body, come back out. And over 3 rounds, it's really difficult. That's hard to beat. That is really, really, really is difficult to beat. But you don't get that many of them anymore. It's definitely changed since they changed to the 10-point must before the World Championships in 2013. It is different, and you do get some fights where they just lean in and just box on the inside, just fight on the inside. And one guy to look out for if people are, really into the kind of amateur scene. There's a Ukrainian kid called Yuri Zakarev, who I saw at the World Youths. He won gold at the World Youths at 69 kilos at welterweight. For the seniors, there was 67 and 71, and he boxed at 71, and he's really good. He won gold. Up until the final, he was a bit kind of matrix. There was loads of upper body movement, punching from strange angles. But in the final, you could tell there was loads of ability there. But in the final, he just boxed like a pro. He changed. He just planted his feet, didn't throw as many punches, slowed it down a bit, and he looked really good. I mean, if I was a promoter, I'd be looking at him, definitely. There was another Russian kid called Shambalat Bishamov who got silver because he got outboxed a bit by a Cuban in the final. But again, he won a World Youth not that long ago. Really comfortable up close, moved really well, always in the pocket. He was very, very good. Very good. There was some really, really good fighters there, as you would expect. But those are the two I probably like the most. Zakarev, I mean, there's going to be people after him. Definitely. Team Usyk probably heading the list.
Right. Well, Andy, on that note, it's about midnight where you are.
Roughly.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. If you want to tell everybody where they can find you and update everybody on what's next for the Macklin's Take podcast.
So we're doing one tomorrow with a guy called Kelvin Travis, who is dad of Nigel Travis, who's Jamie Moore's co-trainer. So Kelvin was an England coach, GB coach for a long time, Coach Matt. So we're just having a good kind of amateur chat with him. He's got plenty to say about pretty much everything. He's always really good company. So that'll be out next week. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Andy Clarke. Same thing on Instagram. And that's pretty much it. Got a few things coming up between now and Christmas. The Women's World Championships was supposed to be in Istanbul in December, but that's been moved. Got a couple of new things that should be starting soon. One kind of quite interesting offer I had the other day to do something a little bit different. Still boxing. Just interesting times really at the minute. Just for everybody, me included. So we're going to keep the podcast going. We love doing the podcast. We're not quite managing to get one out every week at the minute, but Macklin's actually recovering from COVID.
Really?
COVID. Yeah. So he's all right, but that laid him low for a bit. Thanks for having me on again. It's always good fun.
No, I appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed, and I posted on Twitter the episode you did with Sam Jones and his stories about Joe Joyce nearly killing him. And
Sam's really good fun. Yeah, I've been suggesting to Matt that we should get him on for a while, and as he said, sort of like very honestly on the podcast, he just wasn't. I'm just not sure if I could talk to Sam Jones for an hour, because when you see him at press conferences, Sam does seem like a bit much, but he's just doing his job. He's just talking up his fighters. And that's the thing for me, is like you encounter people in boxing who have a lot to say, but when you strip it down to the bare bones, if a lot of what they say is about themselves as a manager, then that rings alarm bells. But if what they say is always just about their fighter, then that's what they're supposed to do. And he's got a really interesting story. Yeah, that Mayweather thing was really funny as well. Like standing in a room with Floyd Mayweather, who's just like looking at your clothes and your watch and just thinking, who is this person? I can imagine that was probably pretty intimidating. But yeah, he's good fun. You should get him on. You should get him on this. He'd be great fun.
Yeah, we've had him. I met him in Vegas at the Carl Frampton when he fought out there at the Cosmopolitan. When Carl fought Tyler McCleary.
Okay, yeah.
He was there, I think, with Guido. So
yeah, he's one of his. Yeah. I mean, that's a great example. Like how's Guido Vianello ended up being managed by Sam? Like that's just and that sounds like a criticism of Sam. It's not. It's just like that. That's the kind of that tells you everything you need to know, because he was like top level international amateur boxing for Italy. Then all of a sudden, yeah. I mean, when I saw that, I just thought, wow, like I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, it's a good story, good episode. His story about where he got to from being like a car salesman or whatever he was beforehand. So yeah. Really interesting. Yeah. Join us next week. You can find us. We'll be doing the preview for the Akhmed Meladov against Ronnie Rios, and obviously Saturday the 20th is the big Terence Crawford against Sean Porter fight. So we can see probably the biggest name on Crawford's resume.
Yeah, I was. Fury Wilder week, they did the press conference for that, or a press conference for it on the Saturday. So I went along to that and picked up some bits for Sky, and that's a great fight, that, isn't it? I love Porter. Like I really like Crawford as well. Like what's not to like about those two? They're just really good fighters. But Porter's a brilliant example of someone who has squeezed every last drop out of himself, and he's a really good fighter. Brilliant fight against Spence. That's one of my favourite fights I've ever commentated on. Great talker, just really, really good bloke. Little bit of history between those two as well. Or they never boxed in the amateurs, but going back to the kind of amateur days, and Terence fired off at Kenny Porter on one occasion. There's a little bit of a story there. Tried to get into that. You wouldn't really talk about it, but it's fine between them now. But that's a really good fight. I know everybody wants to see Crawford against Spence, but we'll have to wait and see. Is Spence going to be the same after the accident? It's kind of hard to know, isn't it, really? But in the meantime, that is a really, really good fight. That's a really good fight. It's going to be on Sky in the UK. I was really hoping that I might get that one, but it's not proved to be the case, unfortunately. But it's a brilliant fight. That brilliant fight.
Yeah, nobody has an easy fight against Sean Porter.
No, absolutely no one. Absolutely no one.
Right. On that note, thanks again, Andy, and join us next week.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.